Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Danny Seabright, President of the US-UAE Business Council, and welcome everyone to today's webinar with two very, very important and key business executives at the heart of the bilateral relationship between the US and the UAE. I could not be more delighted to be joined today on this virtual stage with Dr. Tomislav Mihaljevic, President and CEO of Cleveland Clinic, and His Excellency Waleed Al-Mokarrab Al-Muhairi, Deputy Group CEO of Mubadala Investment Company. We are honored to have these gentlemen serve as co-chairmen of our board of directors. His Excellency Waleed has been an incredible source of guidance and support for a number of years as UAE co-chairman. And moreover, Dr. Tommy has been a longtime friend and supporter of the council, dating back to his time heading Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi, and getting it off the ground as the premier gold standard institution that it is today in the world. We are thrilled to have him just recently become our US co-chairman alongside of His Excellency Waleed. Today, the world is in that inflection point. The developed world is beginning to recover from some of the worst effects of COVID-19 as vaccine distribution picks up, while there remains an urgent need to inoculate the rest of the world against the ravages of the disease. Moreover, new technologies whose power were demonstrated during the pandemic are likely to forever change the way that we work, live, and do business. At the same time, in the United States, the Biden administration is beginning to promulgate new policies that are different from its predecessor in areas such as climate change and engaging with the rest of the world in general. At this inflection point, His Excellency Waleed and Dr. Tommy will address business opportunities and priorities across a number of key verticals in the US-UAE trade and investment relationship. They will also work to identify areas of enhanced partnership between our two countries in this area. For this conversation today, we are pleased to have over 400 registered guests comprising business executives, government officials, and thought leaders from the US-UAE and the wider region. This includes friends and partners from the U.A.E. Embassy in Washington, D.C. and the United Arab Emirates, Consulate General in New York, the U.A.E. Ministry of Artificial Intelligence, the U.S. Embassy in Abu Dhabi and the U.S. Consulate General in Dubai, the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Israeli Embassy in Washington, D.C., the IMF, and reps from 6 different states in the United States: Alabama, Minnesota, Ohio, Texas, Utah, and Pennsylvania. The Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., one of our wonderful partners that we work with, and as well, the AmCham in Abu Dhabi. I should note that this session is on the record. It will be live streamed, and a video recording of this event will be posted on YouTube immediately after. Attendees, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens for any questions that you might have for our panelists when we enter the Q&A discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tomislav Mihaljevic, President and CEO of Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Mihaljevic leads an $8 billion healthcare system that includes a main campus in Cleveland, Ohio, 10 regional hospitals in the United States, 18 family health centers and facilities in Florida, Nevada, Toronto, Abu Dhabi, and London. Dr. Mihaljevic, as I previously said, served as CEO of Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, where he oversaw the opening of the 365-bed hospital and clinic with 3,000 caregivers in 2015. Under his leadership, CCAD has expanded its treatment capabilities, built relationships in the public and private sector, and established its growing reputation for clinical excellence, research, and education. Dr. Mihaljevic, Tommy, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much for a kind introduction. I would like to welcome all the participants on this Zoom call, and I also always am happy to share the stage with Waleed. Waleed and I go way back. There is a friendship that dates many, many years back, over 10 years, we worked closely together. Waleed continues to be the chairman of Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. So our working relationship is transformed into a lasting friendship. So it's always a pleasure to be on the same stage with Waleed. And I would just like to say at the very beginning that I am honored to be a co-chair of the board of directors for a US-UAE Business Council, because I'm very passionate about the opportunities that Business Council can offer, both to the United States as well as to the United Arab Emirates. As Danny has mentioned at the very beginning, I spent quite some time living in the United Arab Emirates, 7 years. And I was there to help put Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi into its function, and served as its CEO for 3 years before taking over my current role. The importance of 7 years in the United Arab Emirates, for me personally, was really transformational. I got to know the country. I get to get inspired by the bold vision of the United Arab Emirates. And I was also encouraged by the fact that I could see in action what a collaboration between visionary leaders and visionary countries can do for the benefit of the society. I do believe, and I know I share this belief with Waleed, that our joint work at the Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi is a wonderful example what joint initiative can do to bring not only health, but new jobs, new educational opportunities, and transformational effect on the life of people in the country, and not only in the country, but in the region. So we have learned a lot. We know that we can do even more. I do believe that the US-UAE Business Council is an important vehicle to broaden our collaboration and do more good in the world and in the region. So with that, I would once again like to thank you for the trust you placed in me by co-chairing the board of directors of the council. And I look forward to my tenure. And then I'll turn it over back to you, Danny.
Thank you, Dr. Tommy, and just thank you so much for agreeing to serve. We really appreciate it. I'd like to turn the floor over to His Excellency Waleed Al-Mokarrab Al-Muhairi, Deputy Group CEO of Mubadala. Waleed serves as Mubadala's Deputy Group Chief Executive Officer and has strategic oversight of the company's broad investment portfolio and special projects at the group level. He is also a member of the Investment Committee, which is mandated to develop Mubadala's investment policies, establish investment guidelines, and review proposed projects and investments to ensure they are in line with business objectives. Waleed is also the chairman of Mubadala's new Investment and Business Planning Committee, which approves deals within certain financial threshold, in addition to the responsibility of annual and multi-year business planning. Furthermore, Waleed has oversight of the real estate and infrastructure and disruptive platforms area of Mubadala. Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today from across the world and however many time zones are represented on this call today. I'd like to echo both my thanks and my appreciation by formally welcoming Dr. Tom Mihaljevic as co-chairman of the US-UAE Business Council. He is somebody who has always shown a great appreciation of the UAE and of Abu Dhabi, and has a strong track record of contribution to the advancement of bilateral relations between our two countries. And frankly, I can't think of anybody more suited for that role. I know that both he and I share an ambitious outlook for the Council, and we believe that it can play a fundamental part in helping the US and UAE forge even closer ties over the coming months and years to come. And folks, you know, it's always an honor for me to speak at a Business Council event. In the past, you've heard me speak about COVID-19 and its effect on our respective countries' economies. We've spoken about, global issues. Today, we're in 2021. And while the pandemic continues to evolve and clearly present us with all sorts of new issues, rest assured that we're making progress and we continue to be committed to our UAE members and partners. So you'll be happy to know that while the pandemic has impacted bilateral trade with the US, the UAE remains the largest export destination in the MENA region for the 12th consecutive year. We've seen an exceptional amount of resilience and, of course, adaptability demonstrated by the Business Council members and other organizations of the two countries. So there's no doubt that the pandemic has represented a catalyst for change. And so although international travel is limited, I haven't gotten on a plane in about 9 months, which is a world first for many people. Technology has enabled us to bridge time and space in a way that I think, most people wouldn't have imagined even a year and a half ago. So last April, I remember, I was talking about the UAE, and I mentioned that I believe very strongly that the UAE would have both the will and the endurance to tackle the pandemic and manage a prolonged period of uncertainty. I think in that respect, I was certainly more right than otherwise. Starting with the tireless efforts of frontline workers, especially in the healthcare sector and other government entities, I think they've been nothing short of exceptional. The mandated protocols and measures adopted by the UAE leadership, which helped contain the spread of the virus and safeguard everybody's health, together with a vaccine rollout, I think has been among the fastest in countries. You guys have seen the league tables and you've seen where we stand vis-a-vis other parts of the world. At the same time, obviously, it's important to balance the health and well-being of citizens with the efforts to keep the economy as open as possible, ensuring that the private sector and other businesses can continue to operate amidst extremely challenging circumstances, thereby protecting the livelihoods of everybody involved. So we're lucky to have a robust banking system. And of course, you've seen the actions by the UAE Central Bank, where those businesses that were deemed to be at greatest risk were able to tap into additional liquidity throughout 2020 that enabled them to weather the most challenging period and obviously emerge in a position of relative strength to drive the economic recovery that started taking place in the second half of the year and hopefully will power on through the remainder of 2021. And so as we enter 2021, remember that this is our 50th milestone. This is a massively important and symbolic event for us. And so as we take a look at the outlook of the economy going forward, I think we're increasingly positive, with the Institute of International Finance now anticipating GDP growth to accelerate from 2.3 to 3% in 2022 and 3.4% the year after in 2023. The UAE certainly has not hit the pause button, and neither have we as Mubadala. So for the past 18 years, Mubadala has supported the UAE economy in its journey to become more diversified and globally integrated by investing both at home and certainly abroad. And in many ways, Mubadala's investment approach over the last year has evolved to what has undoubtedly been a high level of activity guided by clear and long-standing investment principles. 2020 was very likely the most active year that we've had at Mubadala, certainly within the last 3 or 4 years. We started pre-COVID, but essentially doubled down and supercharged many areas that I think were both thematically relevant and were bolstered by long-term conviction on our part. So for those of you that have been tracking Mubadala for a number of years, you will have recognized a decade-long shift in emphasis towards investment in companies that are making groundbreaking discoveries, in addition to partnering with the best in class, and of course, unlocking opportunities in both existing and new markets. Our biggest deployments in the past year have been in sectors that support, I think, the megatrends that are shaping the future. Ultimately, this is about enabling impactful economic transformation for the UAE through strong performance and, of course, value creation. We've continued diversifying our economy, building a diverse set of industries and sectors that enable us to weather, both the normal cyclical kind of ups and downs that you would expect over time. We've continued to invest and partner with pioneering companies. And here I'm just going to rattle off a few examples that I think are relevant to the Business Council. So for example, Waymo, which is an Alphabet subsidiary, otherwise known as part of the Google ecosystem, which is an American autonomous driving technology company. Silver Lake, which is an American global technology investment firm, certainly among the best in class. Many of the businesses that we've invested in or invested with before the pandemic have flourished over the last year, and we've doubled down on existing portfolio companies that were adapted to meeting changes in consumer behavior. Brex, which provides corporate credit cards for SMEs, Kazoo, an online used car marketplace. It's a point of pride that we have a number of companies within Mubadala's portfolio that are involved in vital work in combating the pandemic. We have 4 investments pioneering potential treatments, which include Vir Biotechnology, Recursion Pharmaceuticals, Color Genomics, and Innovacur. Vir Biotech, located in San Francisco, uses technology to stimulate and enhance the immune system by exploiting key observations of natural immune processes. Silicon Valley-based Innovacur is pushing the boundaries of remote healthcare delivery through telemedicine and AI-assisted diagnosis. We've also been increasing exposure to stable and yielding asset classes to hedge against normal fluctuations in business cycles like real estate, digital and physical infrastructure, financial instruments, etc. At the same time, we're gradually and in a measured way reducing exposure to some of our existing sectors that we believe will be subject to macro headwinds in the future. And so, as we've always done, Mubadala will play a central role in facilitating this growth, ensuring that our global presence, expertise, and experience will continue to benefit the UAE and its partners. Maybe just 2 minutes before I wrap up, and maybe sharing my perspective on the global economy, and maybe touch on what the UAE is doing and focusing on with some of its partners. So let me start by saying, notwithstanding the fact that we are in a pandemic, I am optimistic, even though the remainder of 2021 is likely to be unpredictable. I suspect that we're in the midst of a relatively strong recovery, but it is going to fluctuate given the fact that countries and different economies are growing at different paces. There will be a long-term impact of the profound economic stimulus measures that we're seeing all around the world. And of course, you add the layer of complicated geopolitics, and that will add to the challenges. So it seems to me that both with a combination of some of the headwinds and transformational opportunities we all face, we can't afford for the global economy to turn inwards this year. And so therefore, we have to double down on greater global collaboration across business, government, society. And a part of that sense of collaboration is, and here's one example that I know that everybody on this call is going to agree with, is obviously ensuring global vaccine distribution. How much we all embrace this as a global community is going to shape growth, prosperity, and sustainability on a global scale. And as we recover from COVID, frankly, this will have an impact for generations to come. So there's no question that COVID has caused major disruption in healthcare and other places, and I'm going to leave it to obviously my co-chairman, who is obviously infinitely more knowledgeable than I to speak about that. But obviously, we're seeing things that go beyond things that directly impact the pandemic. So look at the health of the earth, climate change. We're seeing really important movements in climate change as governments continue to invest in green recovery plans to create jobs and cut emissions. And I know that we are going to capitalize on those significant opportunities in this space. The UAE has always been agile and ambitious as a nation, and we've long been a convener for addressing global challenges such as climate, deadly diseases, and of course, regional security. So we know that partnerships, especially those embodied by the US-UAE Business Council, form the crux of bilateral relations, and we've been doing that for many years. And it's the great work that everybody's sitting around this virtual table that we all do that continues to propel trade flows, investment, and commerce. And that's very much the glue that binds, I think, our two great nations together. As many of you know, Dubai is going to host the World Expo later this year. This is an event that epitomizes the UAE spirit of openness, collaboration, innovation, and enthusiasm, and of course will help facilitate idea sharing and knowledge sharing. I hope folks, will be able to come down and visit and see for themselves. Let me just end by once again thanking Tom and Danny. I think for their partnership. Tom for accepting to be our my co-chairman. I think it's going to take the council to I think heights we haven't been to yet, and of course Danny and the team for their tireless work. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and I turn it back to both of you.
Thank you, Waleed, and thank you so much for your outstanding leadership over the years. I couldn't say enough how happy I am and pleased and excited I am to work with Tom going forward in his new role with the council. Let me put this question to both of you, and maybe Tom, you jump in first if you like. We'll do a little bit of a conversation here. And again, folks in the audience, please, if you have a question, put it in the chat box and I'll do my best to get to it. But As vaccine distribution gears up globally and the world begins to think about coming back to what everyone's calling a new normal, not the old normal, but a new normal, we'd really appreciate your thoughts on what the lasting legacy of this last unprecedented year, the next 6 months will be on business. And coupled with that, what are the opportunities for the near future in the next 6 months or the year ahead as we come out of the wilderness of COVID-19? Dr. Tom, over to you.
So Danny, first I would like to emphasize that while we have a lot of good reasons for optimism, we hardly have a reason to celebrate. This pandemic is still far from over. Even in the United States, that matches its vaccination efforts with many nations in the world, we're still losing 2,000 American lives a day due to COVID. That is twice as many as we lost in the October last year. So in this space, we're losing approximately 60,000 lives every month. So the pandemic is far from over. I do believe that the vaccination rollout will benefit the countries like U.A.E. and like the United States that have a foresight about the importance of vaccine rollout, and will put them in a much, much better economic position, and it's going to create an advantage when it comes to the economic prosperity and the growth of the countries that are being more successful in vaccine rollout. Just take a look at what has happened, for example, in countries that have not been affected with COVID disproportionately. You know, China's GDP growth, even during the challenging years, has been nothing more than astonishing, nothing less than astonishing. But what we're going to see probably in the remainder of this calendar year, 2021, is a strong recovery in the U.A.E., in the United States. I am cautiously optimistic by an ability to resume in a limited way, however, ability to travel around the world. It is not going to be as vibrant as we would like to see. I would like to say that the challenges with the production of a vaccine will still be present for the remainder of the world, US-UAE excluded, for at least the next 2 years. It is not a distribution challenge, it is really a production challenge. What we are learning, and we've learned many times over during this pandemic, that none of our countries can be safe, and a global business cannot thrive until the entire globe is safe, until more kind of a global society has really matched the efforts in the United States and United Arab Emirates in protecting their citizens. And this will take some time to come. So a lot of reasons, once again, for optimism. I do believe that in the second half of 2021 in our countries, we're going to see a stronger recovery than in many others. However, I would voice caution when it comes to the rapid global recovery in 2021. On the best of circumstances, I believe that we're going to see it in a first couple of quarters of 2022. And on a global scale, it is going to take us at least an entire 2022 to get to the position of having a more flexible trade agreements, migration patterns, and travel resumption.
Thank you, Tom. That's really prescient and important, and actually it's discussions that we have all the time with some of our members, and it sounds right on track to what some of our top companies tell us they're thinking about the situation for 2021. Waleed, from your perspective on that question.
So I tell you, every time I get put on the spot and people ask me to predict the future, the only thing that's consistent is that I'm wrong. So I'm just going to preface that so you guys can take it with whatever grain of salt you want. So since you guys know my track record, but maybe just echoing, I think what Tom has said. First of all, I agree with absolutely everything that he said, and you know, there's nobody more knowledgeable than he in this space in terms of what we're facing from a pandemic perspective. But if I had to just kind of forecast a little bit in terms of maybe a couple of comments. Number one, you're seeing supply chains reform in kind of an interesting way. So let me give you an example of that. So right now, countries that are not kind of, the largest countries in the world, meaning China or the European Union or the United States, are essentially looking and scratching their heads and saying, hey, look, we were caught out as a result of this pandemic. So when we think about pharmaceutical and national security related supply chains, people are going to start thinking about that. And so, clearly we're not large enough as a country, as the UAE, to be producers of everything. We cannot be cut off from the world. But at the same time, you can't help but think that we need to have a strategic capability for the next pandemic and the pandemic after that, and so on and so forth. And so here, if I'm going to make a prediction, I'm going to say, listen, in a limited but really important way, we're going to think about vaccine production. We are accelerating the way that we are thinking about life sciences, and we're thinking through whether we can incubate in the same way that we have incubated other clusters and economic sectors within the country, how we can ensure our national interest and therefore our people's safety by incubating something that makes sense in the pharmaceutical and life sciences space. So one of the things that I think most of you know, especially those of you that are currently living in the UAE through the pandemic, is notwithstanding anything that's happening around the world, most people, and there's been a lot of kind of opinion surveys that have been done, feel very safe here in the UAE, which I think is great. And in large part, they feel safe because of actions that I think the leadership have taken. And so here, having a capability, whether it's in fill and finish, whether it's in gradual production under license for certain types of vaccines over time, increases preparedness. And not only does that increase preparedness, but that increases opportunity too, because now we're starting to talk about partnership with new pharmaceutical partners, many of whom are American companies. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them will end up joining the US-UAE Business Council as we sign agreements with them going forward. So I think that's number one. I think number two, think also about things like food security. So again, another really important issue from a UAE perspective. And so here, again, we can't produce everything, but folks are thinking through how supply chains are going to evolve. So one of the predictions that I'm making, and by the way, you're seeing this in a different way in the United States as the US thinks through the rules of the competition game with China. What you're seeing is, as a result of that, supply chains will readjust, whether it's in semiconductors, and that's very topical today if you've been watching the news over the last 48 hours, and other areas, technological leadership in many ways, together with competition, together with the special ingredients of this pandemic, are causing folks to rethink supply chains, which to me is going to be one of the biggest movements, economically speaking, over the next few years.
Thank you, Waleed. The Biden administration is rightly focused on COVID mitigation and COVID vaccine distribution as its first priorities right out of the box. There are many reports this week that the president will also soon be unveiling new plans for infrastructure renovation in the U.S. These priorities, coupled with the U.S. administration and UAE government priorities on climate change, mean new challenges and opportunities for the business communities. We'd like to explore your thoughts on where there may be opportunities for increased US-UAE business cooperation in particular. And I'm just going to ask Tommy to jump in. The Biden team has put a renewed emphasis on healthcare due to the pandemic, thankfully. What are your thoughts and views on how the US and UAE can cooperate together more closely in this space going forward in the healthcare vertical, broadly speaking, sir?
Yeah. Well, broadly speaking, I cannot think of a better example of collaboration between the United States and any country outside of North America in healthcare than a US-UAE collaboration. And taking a look at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, with the vision of his kindness, with the partnership with Mubadala and Cleveland Clinic, we were able for the first time to replicate the US excellence in hospital care outside of North America in Abu Dhabi through Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And this is really a transformational effort. So are there opportunities for us to collaborate further? Absolutely. So we have opened up, so to say, the gates of a traditional collaboration, and Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi is one example of it. But I would like to follow up on what Waleed said about an importance of collaboration in multiple other facets, because I do believe that the theme of investments in healthcare, the themes about an importance of tackling a climate change, and a third priority about a digital transformation, those three themes are very, very interconnected and meaningfully interconnected. And I think this is an opportunity for us to collaborate. So let me just give you one example. What is the connection between healthcare and climate change? If nothing happens with the climate change, we're going to see an accelerated rate of pandemics attacking the globe. The permafrost, the layer of frozen ground let's say around the northern pole of this globe, can unlock viruses that human race has not been exposed to in the last several thousand years. And when that happens, we will need to react, and it will happen. And if we do not do something substantially different as a global community than we're doing to date, we will be fighting the new pandemics exactly the same way that we've been fighting this one. And we clearly cannot afford to do so. So climate change is really important for the survival of our race and our economy and the world that we know exists today. So healthcare and digital transformation are closely interlinked. We have to start to use the tools of 21st century to attack the healthcare challenges of our times. The first intervention that all of us have used globally to tackle the largest pandemic in the 21st century, the first intervention dates back to the 14th century. And that's the quarantine. And that was still the most successful tool to combat the global phenomenon. So we clearly cannot go there. But if we use artificial intelligence and machine learning, if we learn how to collaborate better, if we learn how to use the data that are important to determine the best defense against new pandemics, and if we use all of those tools to create vaccines that are going to be developed better and faster, and cures for new pandemic, then we can make a big difference. And I know that Waleed and I have spoken about this topic very many times. What Cleveland Clinic is doing as an organization, I'm just going to use it as an example. We started our new Center for Global and Emerging Pathogens and Human Health that will try to answer exactly that question about how to prepare us for the next pandemic, how to react faster, and how to disseminate the cures to our broader global community faster. And this is where U.A.E. and U.S. have to collaborate, because I believe that in order for us to build the scale that is going to be important, that it is going to be effective on a global level, the collaboration is going to be mandatory. I don't think that we can look inwards. We have to look out, because as we've learned, the pandemics do not recognize borders. They do not recognize nations. And the threat that they pose is the threat to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tom. I have to tell you, I'm a big fan of the brilliant Israeli futurist, Yuval Harari. Yeah. And I've read all of his books, and he speaks at length in all of his books about the permafrost and the pandemics of the future to come. And so very salient words. Thank you. Waleed, the U.A.E. has taken significant steps with renewable and peaceful nuclear energy. And as the U.A.E. prepares to participate in the April Climate Summit in Washington, D.C. that President Biden will host, what are the broad areas where U.S. business can collaborate with the U.A.E. going forward in climate change mitigation and technologies?
So Danny, one of the things that I keep coming back to is the fact that, certainly there's no shortage of opportunity. And the reason for that is because the one thing that I think unites the U.A.E. and the U.S. is our shared group of values. So once you have that as kind of the underlying basis, opportunities are limitless. So maybe starting off with the two areas that you talked about, and then maybe I'll even expand to some other ones. So I know, for example, that His Excellency Sultan Jaber, our minister, has actually just had a recent conversation with John Kerry, who is a special envoy for climate change. And so there's a huge amount, I think, of both goodwill and common interest when it comes to how we view climate change. But of course, climate change isn't just about policy, although policy is clearly incredibly important, but there's a role for business and investors to obviously, help power some of these, massive innovative changes that we're seeing, frankly, everywhere in the globe. So whether, you're talking about battery technology, which we are starting to take a very active interest in, certainly onshore and offshore wind generation capability, as number two, an area that I think we've built not a small amount of expertise in through our work, I think, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, and now increasingly so in the United States as the US starts opening up in that way. That's certainly another area. We're also looking at other ways to generate power that are a little bit less, I think, developed and slightly more cutting edge. So certainly we've been looking at waste to energy for a long time. We've been looking at clean coal. We've been certainly looking at hydrogen as a future source of green energy, all of which I think are important over time as we think through how the energy mix and the energy transition is going to kind of unfold over the next, I think, decade or so. So I think that's number one. What's important to also realize is that energy is also a form of infrastructure. And so infrastructure opportunities in the United States, I think, are increasing from an investment perspective. And I think, if I'm going to make another prediction, that you're going to see increased partnership in infrastructure investment between the UAE and the United States. So I think that's number two. By the way, in renewables or more traditional infrastructure as well. Utilities, kind of other areas as well. Technology. So technology drives and is pervasive and is everywhere, right? And so we reorganized Mubadala starting in January to take that theme into account. So some of you might know that we have a new disruptive platform in Mubadala that essentially looks at technology as a theme. We are looking at venture capital. We are redoubling our efforts in growth areas as we think about the role of, machine learning, artificial intelligence, imaging capability, all the really interesting themes that I know everybody is talking about in terms of how they drive economic growth, innovation, and productivity over time. So that alone are three ways that I think are going to lead to increased and greater cooperation between the United States and the UAE over the next few years.
Thank you, Tommy. Cleveland Clinic is a world-class leader, but it's also here at home in the United States. It's very much a leader that the White House always turns to for thought leadership on how to deal with various issues and priorities. What's your sense of where the new U.S. administration is going to go in the next year? What are some priorities that you're thinking about in answer to their call for help? I'm just curious, any more broader business priorities or perspectives than what you just offered in your previous remarks with working with the new team?
Well, we obviously look forward to collaborating with our new administration in the White House, and the insight that we can offer is, I think, something that most of us would share on this call. Obviously, the first priority for Biden administration is going to be an investment into healthcare. Just realizing how important the healthcare is for the remainder for the recovery of the United States in general. Obviously, the second big investment, and those two are closely interlinked, is going to be in providing some financial relief to the Americans who have suffered during this COVID at the most. So equality and equity. As a determinant of not just the individual prosperity, but also as the health of a nation, I think is a top agenda, at the top of the agenda of Biden administration. And I think a lot of resources are going there. And lastly, I think what we're going to see, and this was mentioned already, is a heavy investment in infrastructure. Infrastructure in a very broad sense of word just like Waleed just outlined. So it is an ambitious agenda. We do have a very close ties with very many people who have just stepped into the new roles in the administration, and we look forward to collaborating with them. I do believe there is, generally speaking, something that I would advocate for on behalf of US-UAE Business Council and on behalf of the United States, quite frankly, is to take a really a critical look in the opportunity for something that I call a healthcare diplomacy.
Yeah.
You know, healthcare diplomacy is not even a term that I think exists in contemporary vocabulary of US foreign relations. But when I think about the way for the United States or any country, for the United Arab Emirates, what is the best way to further the interests and the values of any country and to create a lasting partnership with other countries in the world if it's not healthcare and education? And I do believe that in probably the best example of how to do good and how to advance interests of all participant countries for the creation of the stable environment of good economic links is the collaboration through healthcare and education. Take a look at the U.A.E. New York University in Abu Dhabi, Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, blossoming relationship in very many ways. I do believe that this is an under-recognized and underutilized power for good. And the next time I have an opportunity to speak to the federal government, I will use this opportunity to advocate for healthcare diplomacy and educational diplomacy of the United States.
Thank you, sir. Very, very important, especially at this time of pivot that's going on in the United States and the way we try to think about our new role in the world, which is very different from what it was a decade ago. A real quick intervention on the issue of international patient services. We have a lot of healthcare providers on the call today, and Waleed, Tommy, Waleed, we heard your thoughts on how people are going to start traveling again, when they're going to start traveling again, but when will international patient flow pick up? Will that pick up a little sooner or a little faster because people need to travel for healthcare or not? Your just quick thoughts on that one. Either one of you or both.
Well, I hope you're not asking me when you've got, Dr. Mihaljevic on the phone. So let's defer to Tom on this one.
I think it is going to resume quicker, and as it should, quite frankly. I think that most progressive governments, and obviously the governments in our countries are highly compassionate, should allow to travel for healthcare reasons before they allow to travel for foreign nationals for any other reason into their countries. Obviously, providing that the appropriate screening is done ahead of time. But I do believe that should be the priority for any administration.
Okay. Waleed, I have a couple concluding thoughts here, but I wanted to give you a chance to say, you and Tommy both to say a chance to say anything more about your priorities for your institutions for the next year. Is there anything else you want to say about what Mubadala is looking towards? You gave a very good overview. I just wanted to give you one sort of chance to wrap that part up, and then Tommy, the same to you for Cleveland.
So I guess just to start again, you have to start with a thank you, because I think, again, I'm so excited for the next 2 years, given that, Tom, as my co-chairman, I think is going to not only elevate the discussion, but really kind of, in many ways, I think shift it in a way that we haven't yet seen in the US-UAE Business Council. And for that, I'm already thankful. So many thanks for that. In terms of areas of interest going forward, I think I've already covered them, but maybe leave everybody with a couple of thoughts. I think, number one, the world will eventually get back to some semblance of normality, but I do think that there's no question that we will, at least for the next generation, be altered by what we've been through. So the one good thing that has happened as a result of this pandemic is that you've seen technological acceleration and adaptation on a scale that I think we haven't seen. And by the way, it's not just the obvious stuff like, Zoom and the other tools that we use every day to work remotely, but it's more subtle things as well. It has an impact in terms of, how real estate centers are going to develop over time. What's going to happen in the most dense cities around the world, right? Look at what's happening in New York City today. And we know, because we are owners and investors of real estate in places like New York City. So we obviously would love to know how that's going to play out. How are people's shopping habits going to change? Obviously, Amazon is doing wonderfully in today's world, but what does that mean, in 5 to 10 years for consumption habits? Look at, massive companies not like Netflix that, even 5 or 10 years ago were nowhere near kind of what they are today. And what does that mean from a media consumption and kind of packaging perspective? So it's not only about kind of where the world is going, but it's about how does that turn into new and interesting opportunity. And the truth of the matter is that we're trying to figure that out just like everybody else is. If I had to think about one economic challenge that I want to leave everybody with, if you asked me 6 months ago, with the behavior of, the Federal Reserve and other large central banks around the world pumping huge sums of money into the world economies, the last thing on my mind would have been inflation. But, you're starting to see kind of these very small but interesting signs of these shoots kind of popping up. And so those who kind of live in my shoes, start worrying about, well, what's going to happen when inflation starts rearing its head? And, when interest rates start creeping up, what's going to happen to the stock market, and what's going to happen kind of in all the different kind of areas that we all kind of take for granted today. So just a few things to I think, keep in mind. But again, I couldn't be more pleased with having kind of Dr. Mihaljevic here as my co-chairman. Dan, thanks to you and the team for, I think, moderating what I think has been a great panel discussion. And many thanks to the participants for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us this morning and this evening.
Thank you, Waleed. The toughest question is still coming, but I want to give Tommy a chance to give his rejoinder to what you just said. Go ahead, Tommy.
So the focus for the Cleveland Clinic, and I think that reflects the focus on very many large international healthcare providers, is going to be actually in the areas of technology. If you were to ask me what is the biggest transformational opportunity for healthcare, just like any other business, is the appropriate use of a technological infrastructure to accelerate the way that we provide services, make them more accessible, more affordable. And I'm not just speaking about the telemedicine, digital interfaces, but we're speaking about the really use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to start to aggregate all the data that are needed to provide a personalized, individualized, and effective care to as many people in need as possible. One thing that is going to be absolutely mandatory in healthcare is going to be a consolidation. In order for us in healthcare to deliver that type of service, one needs to scale. At times when small hospitals of 100 or 200 beds were able to function effectively as units, are going to be things of the past and not such a distant future. And consolidation will not only be national, it is going to be international. The healthcare provision is still one of the few businesses, it's the largest industry in the world, but the least consolidated industry in the world, and that will change. I'm, however, excited about it because I think the opportunities in the future are unparalleled. There has never been a better time to be in healthcare. And I think the technology, and in particular what I said, AI and machine learning, will drive the transformation at the absolutely unprecedented pace. Wonderful opportunity for US and U.A.E. to continue their collaboration because the vision and the values are aligned. So there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't step up our collaboration at even higher level than it's been historically. You're on mute, Danny.
Danny, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I clicked it and it didn't click. That we always have to have one webinar that says where you're on mute. So there we go. Yeah. We did it. But the Ministry of AI, the first ever, the Minister of AI in the UAE, very, very important. You both mentioned that, and we work very closely with the ministry, and the UAE's minister is just amazing in this space. So I think there's lots of ripe areas there going forward. But the concluding question for both of you, and I like to ask this in different ways to guests on our platform. As you look at the outlook for the global economy in 2021 and the UAE and the US, what keeps you up at night? What do you wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, instead of getting on your Twitter and tweeting, you actually make some mental notes or whatever it is and think about, I want to think about this more strategically at the office tomorrow, when I'm in, or wherever I am, when I think big thoughts. Waleed, and then Tommy. What keeps you up at night?
You ask me a question like that, you're going to get an answer like this, which is that I sleep like a baby. So I don't wake up at 3 a.m. But I think on a more serious note, look, I think there's a lot of things that are uncertain. So remember how I started my remarks. So I talked about, the economic uncertainty that I think we've already addressed, that I think in many ways has been exacerbated both positively and negatively by the pandemic. You add a layer of potential geopolitical kind of changes and complexity. You all know that we live in a complicated neighborhood here. And so these are shifts that obviously will result in some degree of unpredictability. So that creates both opportunity and challenge. So trying to navigate that in the right way as a large investment institution is important. And so we need to always make sure that we're balancing risk and reward and finding those partnerships and those opportunities that I think are consistent with the way that the world is trending. So I just try and make sure that we don't miss the boat. And if we don't do that, then I sleep well. But if I think that we've missed something, then I'll be up at 3 a.m.
All right, sir. Dr. Tom.
I'm very excited about the opportunities ahead of us. And as I mentioned to you, the biggest opportunity, I think, in the business in general is the use of 21st century technology, AI and machine learning, just like you outlined. What concerns me deeply, and I think this is something that I cannot be overemphasized more, is the cybersecurity threat. There is for healthcare and any other business, the biggest challenge that we're facing is the uneven sophistication when it comes to the use of digital tools that can then be used against those that are particularly vulnerable. I'm actually, frankly, far less concerned about our ability, let's say in healthcare, to provide care for patients due to the next pandemic than I am by the risk that is associated with cyber threat. One way to paralyze our ability to care for others is to paralyze our electronic medical record system and the underlying digital technology infrastructure that allows us to provide the care that we provide. So that is the biggest threat. I think this is globally by far the biggest threat. It is all interwoven, this wonderful opportunity that the technology provides and the threats that are associated with the dependency and an unevenness in a playfield when it comes to the sophistication of the knowledge and sophistication of the offerings in different parts of the world.
Thank you. Tommy, we had His Excellency Al-Kuwaiti, the head of U.A.E. cybersecurity, on a webinar last week with the U.S. government talking about the digital domain going forward and the U.A.E.'s new laws in this realm. And he emphasized the threats that are faced from cyber all of the time. We know we have them here in the U.S. Look what happened in our elections. Look what happened in some other cases as well. They're all over the world, and this is something we do have to take very, very seriously going forward. Gentlemen, thank you. The Business Council really, really appreciates your leadership. Our members, some 200 now, and growing constantly. We started out 13, 14 years ago when Ambassador Al-Ataiba came to Washington, D.C. with 30 members, and we're over 200 and growing in all these various verticals. Very, very important. We're very pleased for your leadership, with your help, with your assistance. Next week, we will have a session with His Excellency Tarak bin Hindi, the Director General of Audio, and Hanan Al-Yafei, the CEO of Hub 71. We'll be highlighting the activities in that space. And also, we will have a session that partnering with the U.S. Department of Commerce, a virtual session on the U.A.E. Infrastructure Summit. and highlighting opportunities to work together in the area of infrastructure development going forward. These are just 2 sessions that we have coming up in the next week. We have much more programming on the hook for the weeks ahead. And as we get ready for President Biden's very, very, very important summit on climate change at the end of April, you're going to see some other events that we're hosting on blue hydrogen and with ENIC in the nuclear space and other things. So thank you both very much today. Thank you for your leadership. And again, have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day in the United States. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.